Welcome to Dungeon Master Deep Dive. I'm Mason Edwards, Dungeon Master of Arcane Adventures. We're taking the DM Deep Dive series as a little bit more of a discussion when inspiration strikes, rather than a regular set schedule. That being said, in this episode, we're going to explore the idea of letting players add to the game. This might seem like something obvious to do, but I've seen far too many cases where people believe that it is the job of the game master to create the whole story. In reality, that is not fun, nor is it possible. So, we'll talk about that today. So, without further ado, let's dive in. Collaborative storytelling. At the end of one of the earlier videos that we've done, I quoted famous game master Brennan Lee Mulligan on taking what is said at the table as fact, both from the DM and from the players. In the context of world building, that was a good idea. And the same idea is true here for how the story gets told around the table. Instead of the game master being the prime storyteller, they are instead one of many storytellers, the rest of the storytellers being the players at the table. In this dynamic environment, the story is told by everyone in a piecewise format. A little sprinkle here, a little icing here, a little mixing here. And now I'm hungry for cake. A metaphorical cake, that is. A layered cake is named so for its many layers that can be different but all blend together to make one sweet dessert. The story of your game is the same. Different people providing parts of the story, making for a better whole. And while part of that is impromptu, which we'll cover in a later video, some of it is just letting the players have the reins for a little bit. We're going to go over a few misconceptions before we jump into how you can actually let your players add to the story in meaningful ways. So, the first big conception is that the dungeon master is the pilot of the story, the director, if you will, and the players are just the actors. But if that were the case, then what difference would it make sitting around a table than just writing a book or making a movie? The fact that everyone gets to provide input into the game is what makes TTRPGs stand out among other forms of storytelling. But, as a game master, sometimes the biggest obstacle from allowing this to happen is yourself. Before we continue, let's do a little backstory on Mason. I'm the type of person that struggles with letting go of my control over a situation. My friends will tell you that. Which still happens today, but not nearly as much as when I was younger. But through many years of experience in this hobby that I love so much, I have learned that the very best moments at the table are found when the players get to have influence in the game too. When I share the proverbial director's chair. So if you're like me and you have a hard time letting go, try it out in bits and pieces first. And then I think you'll be pleasantly surprised what you find to occur when you do that. But Mason, what if I give my players too much power? That's another misconception. It's not about who has the power. It's a bunch of nerdy friends sitting around a table to play a game. But from a balancing perspective, I see your point. However, this is where the communication is key old saying becomes actually key. Just talk to your group and tell them that you want them to be able to impact the game, and tell them that you want them to have control over driving the story, but that you're also afraid of things getting out of hand. Your friends will respect that. They'll respect you. The rule of cool is also a great tool to use here, because the DM still has the final say, but it also allows rules to be bent to allow players to better shape the game. With those big conceptions out of the way, let's talk about how you can let your players add to the world around them. In everyone's favorite system, a numbered list. How can your players add to the game? Number one, world building. As we talked about in previous videos, world building is a great way to let your players take the wheel. maybe even before your game starts. In a session 0 or a character backstory planning session, ask a player to bring the world around them to life by designing their character's hometown. This idea isn't new, but it's something I think is worth trying. In fact, it's so valuable that I plan on using it in the future. I came up with a questionnaire to help a player get their initial thoughts jotted down about a character's hometown, of which the DM and the player can then build a settlement together. And this is a huge way that a player gets to impact the game and even the story before the first session of your game even begins. Now, imagine having a story partially or fully take place in the town that the player's character would know so much about it, and you would just set yourself up for success by letting them lore drop instead of you, explaining where the best tavern is, or that mysterious noble to avoid, or maybe they have connections with their friends and family in this village. If you're interested in using this type of design system, let me know in the comments, and I might just have to make a video about it. But back to letting the player world build, you don't just have to limit that to before the game. Let the player make a comment about a village across the ocean. And maybe as the GM, you're saying, well, that village just so happens to exist on the spot, even though the player just came up with that in the moment. So that's just another way that players have a little say through making stuff up. And it doesn't have to fit. If it doesn't fit, at least, then let them believe they were right. And then maybe they'll find out later that they were totally wrong, which can be fun too. But either way, let them add to the game, to the narrative, and to your world by just going with the flow. Number 2, player agency. Oh no, the dungeon master has railroaded us again. That is a phrase you don't want to hear. The age-old battle between too many rails and too few can be a challenging road to navigate. See what I did there? Never mind, it was supposed to be a joke. Moving on. It is important to let the players actually have a say in what the party does. That seems logical, but by giving player options, they get to interact with the game instead of being forced to follow a single path. A common rule of thumb is to always have at least 3 options available to your players. For example, a recent robbery at the bank in this town has been brought up to the party. The party could find the local guards, interview suspects, and work with the bank cooperatively. Maybe, instead, one of the characters in the party has some shady connections that they can pull on with their past backstory, bonuses if you pull on that too, and see what they can find out. Or, alternatively, maybe your party just wants to hunt down the thieves as fast as possible by running out of town in the general direction that the guards said that they were, and pay no mind to the suspects or how they got it done. By giving the players options, they are now more engaged and are set up to have more fun in the game, which is ultimately a win for everyone. It was best put to me like this. Think about you as the game master setting a road moving forward. The road is what you want your players to follow, a story. But along this road, give the players multiple lanes. Can they go faster? Can they go slower? Can they get off and take a detour? And if you follow that mentality, you're set up for this dynamic style of play where players are given agency, and when they have agency, the will to act on their own regard, then they get to have more fun interacting with the world around them. And that leads to a better game. Number 3, the rule of cool. Yes, we mentioned it earlier. Yes, we're going to talk about it again. Yes, this is going to go into more detail than before. Geez, so many questions. The rule of cool is when the game master allows a player to do something that the mechanics of the game might deem impossible. The GM has the power to bend the rules, especially if it would make the game flow smoother. Let's say your party barbarian has spent session after session practicing magic with the wizard, but because they are just a barbarian, they can't cast any spells. In the final boss fight, the barbarian attempts to call upon their raging fury and weeks upon weeks of magical prep with the wizard to cast a single lightning bolt in their hour of darkest need. While the mechanics of the game say you can't do that because barbarians can't cast magic, the dungeon master can absolutely say, yes, you can cast a lightning bolt as your rage calls lightning from the clouds above and sparks shoot out from your hammer or axe, and a bolt of lightning strikes the BBEG. Now, that's cool. Would it happen every time? No, of course not. But for the sake of the game, the DM allows it to be so. And now that player has had an awesome moment that they will probably never forget. Just because you said, sure, this one time, let's do that. Number 4, homebrew. One final way that players can impact the game is by homebrewing their own races, classes, subclasses, items, spells, and even monsters. I would definitely advise that a player and the GM work together on this outside of the game. But letting a player unveil that unique subclass they have been working on for months can be a great way to take an indirect approach. Matthew Mercer has done this for years, homebrewing various aspects of his players' characters with them for every one of Critical Role's main campaigns. Take Percy's firearms, Caleb's dunamancy, or Laudna's very existence as great examples of amazing homebrew. And that takes a lot of work, but it is absolutely worth it. It lets players have unique moments and add details to the game that no one else can. And it also gives the dungeon master a launching point for stories yet to come. And by no means am I suggesting that you just let the players homebrew whatever they want. But don't just say no homebrew unless that's the type of game you and your friends are trying to play. I personally have a rule at the table where all homebrew must either be created by me and the player in tandem together directly, or I must extensively look over someone else's work before I allow it into my game. And that can help you filter out as much extra stuff that might be unbalanced as you want. But it also allows the players to have cool moments in taking part in their designing process. And on top of that, along with homebrewing, also remember that third-party content adds a plethora of more game experiences that can enable your players to have more fun at the table and let them add more. All in all, letting players collaborate on the story with the dungeon master makes for a better story together. So, the next time you're playing your game, let your players tell the story with you. That's all for this episode of Dungeon Master Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.